maybe thought about it, but no, it was a total shock when it came, and very excited. It is the monarch that is the key to this, and the Constitution that underpins the monarchy. Whispers from deep inside Buckingham Palace hint at a private letter left by Queen Elizabeth, one that stunned both Charles and William. What shocking message did Princess Anne reveal, and why does it center around Kate? Stay tuned to uncover the secret. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch till the end. Buckingham Palace had seen its fair share of historic meetings, but this one felt different. In the quiet of a late evening, Princess Anne requested a private audience. No aides, no cameras, just 3 people, King Charles, Prince William, and herself. The message was clear. This wasn't business as usual. The room they gathered in was steeped in tradition. Velvet curtains hung heavy, and portraits of ancestors looked down from the walls as if waiting to hear what would come next. Anne didn't waste time. From her coat, she pulled a small aged envelope. The corners were worn, the paper softened by time. Charles raised an eyebrow. William glanced at his aunt. And as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright. Puzzled, she placed the envelope on the table between them and said simply, "It's from Mother." The atmosphere shifted. Anne didn't speak again. She waited. With a hint of hesitation, Charles picked it up, carefully breaking the seal. The Queen's familiar handwriting stared back at him. He began to read silently, his expression changing with every line. William leaned closer, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. He didn't know it yet, but what lay inside that envelope would force them all to rethink everything they believed about the Crown's future. The room felt colder as the letter unfolded. Queen Elizabeth's words weren't lengthy, but every sentence was purposeful. It wasn't about Charles. It wasn't about William. The message centered around one unexpected name, Catherine. She described Catherine as the kind of woman who could quietly carry the weight of the monarchy with grace. She said to me, "You ought to do it." And I said, "Look, you know, I don't need to do that. I'm not down to do this. This is your someone who had already won the people's hearts, not because of duty, but because of presence." She wrote, "The Crown will always need a face the people trust, not just by title, but by truth." Anne watched the 2 men absorb the message. Charles's grip tightened slightly. William blinked hard, reading over his father's shoulder. There was no mention of altering the line of succession. The Queen wasn't rewriting laws. She was sharing a wish, a hope that the future wouldn't rest solely on kings, but on a woman who had proven herself through character. It wasn't an instruction. It was a vision. Anne spoke softly, breaking the silence. She wanted you to know this when the time felt right, but what did it mean for their roles, and how could they possibly carry this forward without unraveling everything the monarchy was built upon? The answers weren't clear, but the message was. For a moment, no one said a word. The ticking clock in the corner was the only sound. But I know that in the position I'm in, that's what's required of me to do. And then Charles spoke, almost whispering. "This isn't how it's done." His voice didn't carry anger, just disbelief. He wasn't dismissing the Queen. He was trying to make sense of a letter that didn't fit within the royal script he had followed his entire life. William stayed quiet, his eyes locked on the letter, reading it again as if hoping the words might change, but they didn't. Anne didn't push them. She simply stood by, calm, resolved. She had carried this message for months, maybe longer. Now it was no longer hers to bear alone. Finally, William asked, "Why didn't she tell us earlier?" Anne gave a half smile, her voice steady. "Maybe she knew you weren't ready to hear it then." Charles rubbed his temple. The weight of the past and the future pressed against him. They had choices now, none of them easy. They could ignore the letter and preserve tradition, or they could follow its spirit and risk a wave of questions no palace was ready to answer. It came about from a desire to see more change. And but one thing was certain, the Queen's message had been delivered, and now they couldn't pretend it didn't exist. What made Catherine stand out? To understand the Queen's message, we have to look at Catherine's journey. Not the titles or appearances, but the essence of who she's always been. She didn't grow up in palaces. Her early life was ordinary. Her family believed in hard work, education, and respect. When she met Prince William at university, she wasn't looking for attention. She was focused, kind, and carried herself with quiet dignity. As their relationship grew, so did the spotlight. But unlike others who might have chased fame or folded under pressure, Catherine remained centered, calm, consistent. She took on royal duties slowly, never rushing to be seen. She studied, observed, and eventually began shaping her own role. The fact that relationships comes out so strongly through that is really powerful. Supporting children's mental health, visiting hospitals, speaking to families, her work wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every handshake, every visit built a bridge between the public and the palace. The Queen had noticed behind the scenes. She watched how Catherine handled pressure, avoided drama, and remained loyal not just to William but to the institution. That's why in her private letter, Queen Elizabeth didn't describe a princess. She described a leader, a woman of strength, compassion, and courage. And that's why Charles and William were shaken, because deep down they knew the Queen had seen something in Catherine long before the rest of the world had. Within days, whispers began. Nothing official had been released, but the palace buzzed with rumors. Senior aides overheard just enough to guess the truth. A letter, a message, a shift in royal expectations. Some within the royal household felt uneasy, not because they doubted Catherine's character, but because it signaled change of not just interest, but of service of understanding. All the way and change in the monarchy doesn't come easily. Supporters of tradition whispered that such messages should remain personal, not guide policy. Others, especially younger staff, quietly celebrated the Queen's vision. They saw in Catherine what the Queen had seen, someone modern enough to relate, yet traditional enough to respect the crown. Meanwhile, the press caught wind of something happening. Headlines hinted at royal unrest. Private meetings, tensions within the family. The public didn't know the full story, but they could feel a shift coming. And Catherine, she was completely unaware. While debates stirred in back rooms and behind closed doors, she continued her schedule without pause, visiting charities, reading to children, organizing early years campaigns. It was that quiet consistency that created the divide. Stick with those, not worry too much about the things, the fashions, the things that come up and go. And some saw it as the perfect strength to lead a new chapter. Others feared it would disrupt the carefully balanced hierarchy. Anne, watching the reactions unfold, remained grounded. She knew her mother's wishes weren't about titles, they were about survival. The monarchy wouldn't collapse overnight, but if it didn't adapt, it could slowly fade from relevance. And that's the choice they all now faced. William had always known his future was mapped out for him. From the moment he could walk, cameras followed. His training began early. How to wave, speak, lead, but now everything felt uncertain. The Queen's message had opened a door he didn't expect. He loved Catherine deeply. There was no question about that. But realizing that even the Queen saw her as the monarchy's anchor, possibly more than himself, that left him shaken. He started to reflect on their roles, their differences, where he followed rules. And William and I had been doing everything we can to process and manage this. Catherine read the room. Where he carried the burden, she carried the people's trust. It wasn't envy, it was clarity. He began to see what the Queen had seen, and maybe that realization didn't diminish him. Maybe it simply revealed that the future didn't belong to one person anymore. William didn't speak much during those days, but he watched and he listened, because sometimes leadership isn't about being in front. It's about knowing when someone else might lead better and having the strength to let them shine. Anne knew it was time. She found Catherine in one of the smaller drawing rooms organizing a charity folder. No cameras, no makeup team, just her in quiet focus. Anne gently handed her the letter. Catherine opened it slowly. As she read, her expression didn't change, just her eyes. She looked up and asked only one question. "What does William think? You didn't throw things away. I mean, I'm that old." That often comes from Anne replied honestly. "He's thinking, he's listening." Catherine folded the letter neatly and placed it in her lap. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, in a calm, steady voice, she said, "I need time." Anne nodded. She expected that. Catherine didn't rush into decisions. Her first thought wasn't power. It was her children, her marriage, her responsibilities. She wasn't afraid of the crown, but she understood what it cost. And in that moment, Anne knew the Queen had been right all along, because true leaders don't chase the crown. They consider what it means for everyone else first. News travels fast, even in whispers. A few details leaked. Not the full letter, but enough to spark debate. Social media lit up. Talk shows asked, did the Queen really choose Kate? Some critics scoffed. They said tradition must come first. Others embraced the idea, saying it was time for a new face of the monarchy. Polls showed rising support for Catherine, not as a replacement for William, but as a leader in her own right. In the streets, people spoke of her kindness, her warmth, her quiet presence during tough times. Inside the palace, things remained calm on the surface, but everyone knew the shift had started. William continued his duties. Charles kept the public schedule, but the air had changed. And Catherine, she smiled, she served, she waited because she knew that when the people truly trust someone, they don't need a title to follow them. The monarchy stood at a quiet crossroads. It wasn't about taking a crown from one head and placing it on another. It was about redefining what the crown meant. Could Catherine take a larger public role without shifting titles? Could she become the steady hand the people needed while William stood beside her? No changes to succession, no rulebook were written, just a quiet reshaping of influence. It wouldn't be declared in a press release. It would unfold slowly, deliberately. The Queen's message wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about preparing everyone for a future that required more than tradition. It required trust, and that trust, it seemed, already had a name. Catherine didn't seek to lead, but maybe that's why she's the right person to do it. In a world full of noise, she's been a voice of calm. In a family full of expectations, she's remained grounded. And in a palace full of history, she might just write its next chapter. She never asked for this role, but the Queen saw her anyway, not as a symbol, but as a solution. As the world watches the royal family take careful steps forward, one thing is clear. Leadership doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes the quietest voice carries the most weight. What do you think? Did the Queen get it right? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more royal revelations and stay tuned. This story is far from